Welcome to Designing in Silhouette Studio. I'm Kelly Wayment with Silhouette. We're going to get to know Silhouette Studio better for designing purposes while making some fun projects along the way. I recommend going through the steps in your own software, whether or not you want to cut out the final projects. Practicing the software tools will help you learn how they work so you can use them beyond what you see in the class. I'll be using the Silhouette Cameo 3 in this class, but Silhouette Studio runs any model of Silhouette Cutter. Let's take a brief tour of the software first. Okay, so we've got our software tools, our drawing tools along the left. We've got some general document tools across the top, our main navigation tabs on the top right, and our studio tools or panels along the right-hand side. We've got a quick access toolbar up here on the top, and that holds frequently used tools, and that changes depending on what you have open or selected. You'll see me use that a lot. So when you first open Silhouette Studio, you'll see the workspace, and that's also called the design area. You've got a cut area here that looks like your virtual mat, and your holding area out here that's outside the virtual mat. Your page setup panel is the top right panel choice, and it opens automatically when you first open Silhouette Studio. And that page size that you set actually determines your cut area. You also, in the page setup panel, have your cutting mat selection, and down below you want to check Show Cut Border. When you check or uncheck this box, you have a little red line that shows up on the edge of your page, and that shows what your cut area is. And that's actually more noticeable when we set up a letter size page, and we're going to reveal the cutting mat. So now if I check Show Cut Border and off and on, you'll see that red line show up. So anything you want to cut has to be within that red border. If you don't have Show Cut Border checked, you might not realize you're outside of your available cut space until you are going into your cut preview in the Send panel. So I almost always leave this Show Cut Border enabled. I'm going to set this back to full opacity for my mat, and we are going to look at Preferences. That's this little gear icon in the lower right-hand corner. And it has several tabs with lots of options, but I just want to show you how I have mine set up for designing in Silhouette Studio. So on your Defaults tab, I do have checked Cut to Edge of Page. So if you remember that little red cut border I showed before, if you have this unchecked, you can leave a tiny border around the edge of your page size that you've set up, or you can check this box to tell the software to cut that full page size. And of course, that's limited by your machine. So if I uncheck Cut to Edge of Page and click Apply, then that border has moved. So let me click OK, and I'm going to zoom in. And now you can see this little red border here. If I uncheck the Show Cut Border, you can see that border better. I'm going back into Preferences, and I do want to check Cut to Edge of Page so I can use my full cutting area, my full page size that I've set up. Okay, next we want to go to the Tools tab, and this is where you can choose to have any of your tools revert to the main select arrow after you use each tool. And you do that by having it say Choose Select. Or you can choose to continue using the tool until you manually switch back to Select. Either choice is fine, and it's easy to switch back here in Preferences if your particular project is better with one or the other. So I want to show you that with the Knife tool. So after using Knife, we're going to choose Continue Using Knife. And let's click OK to commit that choice. Now I'm going to draw a rectangle over here with my drawing tools. and I'm going to select a knife. I want it to be treated as solid, and I do want auto apply checked. And you'll see that as I use this knife tool, the knife tool remains selected because of that choice I made in preferences. And you can just keep going with your knife tool until you click this select icon up here in the upper left again, or you can use your hotkey, your shortcut letter V on your keyboard, and that gets you back to your select tool also. If in preferences you choose select after using the tool, you have to choose select again, your little select icon, every time you want to use it again. So in preferences, I'm going to set all of mine to choose select, and if you do that also, then your behavior is going to match mine as you work through the projects in the software. Now there's another section here for selection tools, and if you want it to behave like mine, choose when drag selecting, you want select shapes touching drag box. That means you don't have to completely enclose the shapes when you want to select them. It'll just select it when you touch it with your mouse as you're dragging. And we also want a single bounding box so the screen doesn't get cluttered with a bunch of bounding boxes and rotation handles. Okay, so once you have that set up like I do, then your software will behave like mine. Let's start working with designs now. Open a new page by clicking on the plus symbol in the top upper left of your work area. When designing in Silhouette Studio, you can work with your library designs, text, drawing tools, or a combination of any of those. Let's make a little camera box straight from the library. We'll cut it without modifying it, but we'll use several design tools when preparing it for cutting. These tools are helpful in working with most designs. So let's go into the software. I've purchased a design called 3D Instant Camera Box from the Silhouette Design Store, so it's been added to my library. We'll go to the Library Navigation tab, and we're just going to use the search for camera box. And when I find the design I want, I'll just double click to open it on my design page. I'm going to reset my design page to fill my full Cameo mat. So I'm going to choose the Cameo choice. That way I can see as much as possible. And if you are working with a smaller machine, you can just move your design off to the side while you're working. Now something that's optional, but I do like to do when I'm designing, is to color the objects and line them up to get a visual idea for how they're going to look and to tell me what papers to use. So I'm going to ungroup these, and I can do that in the Quick Access toolbar. And now they're separated. And sometimes you will find that your pieces will separate that you really don't want separated. So these perforated lines down here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So these perforated lines have become separated from their outer box, and I don't want that. So I'm going to select the box and the perforated lines and go ahead and group them again. Again, that's in the Quick Access toolbar. And now you can move this around without losing any pieces that should stay together. I'll look at my full page again, and I want to select these pieces one at a time and use fill colors to get them colored. So I'm going to select this one, and in the upper left corner you can choose a fill color. I'm going to fill this one with black. Now when we're just cutting paper, the fill color doesn't really matter. It's just giving me an idea of what colors of paper I want to use and being able to see and move things around. Now I do want these holes here in this piece to be different colors. I want to be able to cut them from different colors. So I'm going to ungroup this shape, and I want to copy just those 3 pieces. So I'm going to select those 3 pieces, and I'm going to use one of my favorite ways to copy, which is to hold my Alt key, or would be Option if you're using a Mac, and you just click and drag off to the side. And that makes a really nice copy. So I want to group this back together, this first original piece, so it doesn't come apart while I'm moving it. I'm going to ungroup these 3, and I can select one at a time to recolor them. Now, as I mentioned, the Quick Access toolbar has a color fill option up in the corner, but if we're coloring a lot of pieces at the same time or in succession, then I like to open the fill panel, and that stays open while I choose the different colors. So I'm going to make one of these pink, one of these yellow, and one a turquoise. Now once I have these pieces all filled, let's go ahead and finish filling those. I also like to arrange my pieces just to make sure that they're going to fit together. So this one I want in front of this other piece, and it's going behind. So again, in the Quick Access toolbar, I'm going to choose Bring to Front. And then we've also got other choices up here like centering. And so I'm just going to spend a minute and get these all aligned. And remember, you can group these pieces if you want to move them around at the same time so they don't come apart, but you'll just kind of group and ungroup as you go just to make sure things are where you want them. Okay, so now I know that this camera box is going to look the way I want. So I'm going to break it apart and just move these pieces off to the holding area. Because I only want to cut one at a time. Now this little box here, the square here, I want actually to make another copy because I want to cut it once with this box base, and then I want to cut another one out of pattern paper. So I'm just going to make another copy again with my Alt or Option key and click and drag a copy away. Okay, so I'm going to start with my tan piece. I want to cut that first, so everything off to the side is not going to cut. This is in my cutting area. And I want to make sure on my page setup panel that it matches the page that I'm going to cut. So it is a 12 by 12 inch piece of paper, and I am using my 12-inch cutting mat for the Cameo. And then we're ready to move on to the Send panel, which is in the upper right corner. So this cut preview shows with bold lines what is going to cut. So you know where the machine intends to cut. If you need to turn something, if you don't want it to cut, you can either move it off to the side, or you've got choices like changing it to no cut or cut and cut edge. And we'll cover that again with another project. You'll notice that these pieces off to the side here do not show the bold lines, so you know that they're not going to cut. All right, I'm going to cut this out of pattern paper, so I'm going to go ahead and choose my material is pattern paper medium. And I want the action to be cut, and I'm going to use my auto blade, so my tool is set to auto blade. So I have my paper loaded on my mat, and I have my rollers adjusted for the full 12-inch mat width, and I'm just going to load it by lining up this side here and the arrow over here, and I'll press load. Now that it's loaded, we'll just press send in the software. So I have all my pieces cut out and I've taken them off my mat. So now I'm just going to show you how to assemble this little camera box. I'll start with the larger base, fold it along those perforations. And just start adding some adhesive. I will put this piece all together before I glue it to the front. If I'm covering a smaller area, I'm just going to use a little needle-tipped glue applicator. These little colored pieces will fit right in there because we took them straight from that black piece. And when I'm doing paper crafts, I always like to add a little bit of dimension. So I'm going to use some foam adhesive to pop that little camera lens forward. Okay, and one of these can get glued to the front and one to the back. And now you have a fun little camera box to give away as a party favor or put something else cute in it. Now that you know some basics for working with existing designs, let's manipulate some library designs a little further. For this project, we're going to take a 3D box and change the cutout design on the front. We're going to use one simple box in this example, but you can use the same technique with a lot of different boxes, bags, and other designs to customize them. We'll talk about grouping versus compound paths, and also what's appropriate for a cutout design. So let's move into the software. I've opened this file called Crayon Box from my library, And the heart is cute, but what if I want to use this as a party favor for a themed party? In this example, I'm going to replace the heart with a unicorn. I've already opened 2 different styles of unicorn. The first thing we need to do is remove the heart from the box. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now, this design is filled with color, and you can see when I move this around that that heart in the middle is a hole. You can see what's behind it. So you can ungroup this box to a certain extent, and it will ungroup the perforated lines, but it does not ungroup the heart. That's because it's a compound path, which I like to think of it as a single layer with holes in it. But we still can release that heart. We're going to select just the box, not the perforations, and you can just right-click and choose Release Compound Path. Now you'll see that that heart is filled with color, and we can separate it from the box. We're just going to drag the heart off to the side. We're not going to use it. But we do want to group those perforations back with the box. And the group is, again, up in your quick access toolbar. Now we have a box ready, and we can add a unicorn, but you can't add just any design. The design can't have any inner pieces because those will fall out when it's cut. So I've got a letter A, and you can see that that hole would fall out if you cut that. So that's not a good design to use. A good design is to just use an outline like this unicorn profile. Now this one does have one inner piece that's an eye, but that's fine. I don't mind if that falls out. I want the whole profile of this unicorn. So we'll resize this to 2 inches wide, and we'll place it where the heart used to be. I'm going to use the scale tool. While that's selected, I'm going to make sure that the aspect ratio is locked, and I'm just going to change the width to 2 inches and hit enter, and that makes it the right size for me. Now I'm going to make a copy of the box so I can do a unicorn on another box. So again, I'm going to use my Alt key or Option on a Mac and click and drag a copy away. Now this unicorn over here, it's not an outline, but I can use it because it's a stencil type design. All of these pieces are detached from each other, and each individual piece will become a hole in the background, so that will work for us. I'm going to resize this just with the corner handle to just under 2.5 inches tall. And I can see that dimension change as I drag that corner handle. So now when I move this to the top of the box, you can see that it's underneath. So I'm going to use my Bring to Front choice in the Quick Access toolbar. That brings it out in front again. So let's look at the letter A again, and I'm going to show you how you can actually convert that to a stencil. We need to create a gap right here so the inner hole is connected to the outside area, the background. You can do that with the knife or the eraser tool. The eraser tool is a little bit bigger, but you don't have a lot of control, and the knife tool will give you a straight line. And so it's got a nice visible indicator. So I'm just going to make sure that that's treated as solid, and I will click and drag my knife tool down, and that makes a slice in there, and I'm going to do that one more time. And now you can see that that inside of that letter is now going to be connected to the background if I place it over the box. So that's one way you can convert a design into a stencil so you don't lose the inner section. Okay, so now the only decision we need to make is do we group this or do we make it a compound path to connect that unicorn to the box? If we use the modify tools, which is a modify panel over in the panel section, we can make a compound path right here. Now, the machine doesn't actually care, since it's just cutting, it doesn't care whether it's grouped or a compound path. Let's change one of these designs. Let's change this one to a compound path. So I'm going to choose Make Compound Path with both those selected. And this one, once I get the design where I want it, I'm just going to group it. So you can see that they look a little different. The color has changed on the one that we made a compound path, so you've got a visual change. But when we go to the Send panel, you can see that all those cut lines that we need are in bold red, and so either grouping or compound path is going to work in this situation. So we'll go ahead and set the material to pattern paper and the action to cut and the tool to auto blade. And then once my paper is loaded on the mat, I can load it in the machine and just click send, and that'll cut it for me. So I have cut these with a variety of papers on my Cameo machine, and I'm just going to show you how to assemble them. So we have these perforations. We're just going to fold along all of the perforation marks. This one has quite a few tabs, but it's really nice when it comes together. And we only need glue on one tab. And then just tuck everything in like a regular crayon box. Slip your crayons in. So now you've got a really fun and colorful party favor. The next project we'll do to modify existing designs involves welding shapes to a frame. We'll make a flamingo card. So in the software, we're going to open a new document, and we'll start by making the card base. We want the rounded rectangle tool, which you find over here with the drawing tools. When you hover over that, you'll get a little flyout, and you can choose the rounded rectangle option. So we will draw this, just click and drag. We'll make it about 5 inches wide and 7 inches high. And once I've got it approximately the way I want, I can just change that to the exact measurements in the scale panel. So I want to make sure that it is unlocked so I can change each dimension separately. So my height is 7 and my width is 5. And I hit enter, and that goes exactly to where it needs to be. Now on a rounded rectangle tool, we can adjust the curve of the corners. I'm going to hold my shift key while I drag one of these red dots, and that will make sure that they change at the same proportion. So I want it to be kind of a wide curve. That looks good. And now I want to make a window inside of there. So I'm going to use my offset tool. You can find that over on the right-hand side with an offset panel. And I want to choose internal offset. So I want to make something inside the larger shape. So I'll click internal offset, and I want to change my distance to about 0.70. You can use the slider or just use the input box. And once that's ready, I'll click apply. Now I want to select only the rounded rectangle, and I'm going to make 2 copies. And one of the other ways I like to make a copy is to hold my Control key, or that would be Command if you're using a Mac, and just hit your arrow on your keyboard while you're holding that Control key. So I've made my 2 duplicates right off to the side, and I've got my 2 sides to my card base, and I need to weld them together. So let's zoom in. And I'm actually going to nudge this left piece over just a little bit, just to make sure that it's completely overlapping this other piece. So I'm going to just use my arrow key and tap it once to the right. So I'll select just the original rounded rectangle and the one off to the left. And I know they overlap, so I am ready to choose Weld, and I can do that on the Quick Access toolbar. I had a guide arrow appear there, which I don't want, so I'm just going to select it and hit Delete. Okay, so now I want to turn this inner rectangle into a cutout in this card. I want it to be a frame, and that will let me weld other shapes to it. So I'm going to select the inner rectangle, make sure, bring it to the front. You can do that in the Quick Access toolbar. And you'll see if I fill the pieces with color now, they are separate pieces. They both fill with color. So any welding I did at this point would actually absorb that inner piece into it, and it would not become separate, it would just disappear. So I want to make this a compound path. I want a hole to be in the middle. So select the base and the inner rectangle. And then I'm going to open my Modify panel. And if I choose Make, that's going to turn overlapping pieces into holes. So now that's a window. So now I've got a frame, and I'm actually able to weld other designs onto this card shape that we've created. I'm going to go to my library, and I want a shape called Fringe Flamingo. Double click to open. Go back to look at that full page. Okay, so this is actually already the right size. I don't need to resize this one for this card. If you are choosing your own design, you want to make sure that you've got pieces that will overlap the frame that you've created. So I'm going to ungroup this and move these other pieces off to the side. I don't need them yet. And I'm going to position this base of the flamingo over here on the card so it overlaps. I'll zoom in again. And I've got an overlapping area with the beak and the tail and the foot. That's what I want. So I'm going to select the flamingo and the frame together and click Weld. And you'll see that that flamingo has taken on the color of the background. Now they're all one piece. All right, so now I want to add a phrase above the flamingo. So I'm going to choose my text tool on the left, click down to create a cursor, and I'm going to type "stand tall" in all caps. Now if this is too long, I'm going to drag over this blue handle on the side, the blue bar, and that forces a line break for my 2 words. Now, up in the Quick Access toolbar, since I'm working with text, I've got text options, and I want to choose center to justify that as center. You can also find these same options if you open the text style panel. To select text, you can do it 2 ways. You can either, while it has a flashing cursor, you can just drag across your letters like selecting text in other programs, or you can click off to the side and click once, and that will also select the text. I want to change the font, and I know the name of the font, so I'm just going to start typing in LW Tinsel and hit enter, and that has changed my font to what I want. So I want to be able to weld these together, but that means they need to overlap. So I'm going to go to my text style panel on the right. And I can change my character spacing and my line spacing to get those to overlap. So I'm just going to shrink up the character spacing to about 85% and my line spacing to about 60%. And those are overlapping pretty well at this point. I'm going to zoom in a little further. Now at this point I can just ungroup them and nudge them together. So I'll ungroup them. Now it's no longer text, and I can just use my arrow keys to kind of nudge everything over so it's got pieces that are touching and overlapping. I'm going to group those two, group the top one together, group the bottom word together, and then I can use my Align Center choice in the quick access toolbar to get those all lined up again after I've moved things around. And keep in mind that once you ungroup text, you can't edit it any further, so you might want to make a copy first before you ungroup any text. Okay, so these now can be welded together. Click weld here, and it looks like I have a little bit of a gap, so I can still move that a little closer and weld again. Then I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I want this text to be overlapping that frame just a little bit so I can weld to it at the top. Okay, so that is ready. I'm going to go ahead and select it all and click weld. And now that is all one piece. Last thing I need to finish off this card, make it as a card so I can cut it, is to draw a perforated line. So I'm just going to go over here to my line drawing tool. I'll select the straight draw a line tool and click and drag. If I hold my shift key while I'm dragging, that'll make it perfectly vertical. Zoom in again. And I can change it to a perforation by choosing a dashed line up at the top with the line style on the quick access toolbar. Now I want to make this line perfectly centered. So I'm going to select the line and the card and just choose with my align options this center objects. And now I will group it so it all moves together. Okay, and you'll remember that I made an extra rounded rectangle over here at the beginning. What I want to do with that is to cut it with a pattern paper, and it'll just sit behind this card. The only problem is it might have this left edge tuck into the corner, into the perforation, the fold line, and get in the way. So I'm going to use my knife tool to slice off just a little bit of it so it doesn't get in the way of the perforation when you fold it. So grab the knife tool on the left, choose treat the shape as solid, and this time I want to uncheck auto apply. That means when I draw my knife tool, my knife line, again hold shift while you're dragging to get it perfectly vertical. So instead of automatically cutting where that is, I can use my arrow keys and position that knife line where I want. And so it's just barely overlapping, and now I can click apply. And that has trimmed off that little edge, and we can delete that. All right, and just like every time that we cut, just remember to only have your paper on your mat that you want to cut at that time. And you can set your page size in your send panel. So if I was cutting from letter size paper, I would make sure that I'm choosing letter size paper, and I can change it to landscape orientation. And that way I know that will fit. And then when I'm done cutting this pink piece, I would just move it off to the side, move another piece on, and change my paper in the mat. And just make sure that every time you do that, that you change your settings in the send panel for the appropriate color, the appropriate weight of paper. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut those one at a time, and then I'll assemble it. So I have cut these pieces individually on my mat in the Cameo machine, and now I'm just going to show you how to assemble it. So this is the large card base that we made, and it's got that perforation that we added in. And I want to put this piece, this is the side where we sliced with the knife tool, so it'll fit in there nicely without getting in the way of that perforation. So I'm just going to glue that on first. Just make sure you get enough adhesive to make sure that that sticks. And this is just kind of a tape runner adhesive. It's good for covering a lot of area, and it's dry so it doesn't cause any warping that you can get with some liquid glues. I do use liquid glue on skinny areas. We'll just dab little dots of that. We want this to stick to this pattern paper that we're going to put in there. So all that adhesive is there. I'm just going to go ahead and line this up. Hold it in place, and I will just fold that over and press it down. And then we've got the layers of this fringe flamingo, and it's got just 3 sections, and I want to curl up the little fringe just a little bit to give it some dimension. So you can actually see those layers when it's all put together. A little bit of curling, and then I will again use my glue, and I'm not going to put any glue on the fringe parts, just the top areas, and line that up. With the liquid glue, you've got a little bit of wiggle room to reposition before it dries. And then my other layer. And the top layer. And I would probably press and hold that for a little bit just to make sure it sets really well, and then lift those little fringe bits up again once it's completely dry. But then you've got this really fun textured card that we created completely from scratch. So those are some ways to use and modify existing designs to create unique projects. One of the great things about Silhouette Studio is you can create a project from scratch without purchasing any designs at all. So let's make a card completely from scratch using drawing and text tools. We'll start in the software. I've got a new document open and I'm going to use the grid to create my card layers. In the Page Setup panel, open the second tab for the grid. Check the boxes for Show Grid and for Snap to Grid. We can make the grid lines darker by moving the selection point around in the colored section at the bottom. Having Snap to Grid enabled makes drawing rectangles very easy. I usually keep my spacing at 1 inch and divisions to 4. That means my snap points can go as small as 1/4 inch, although you can change these dimensions for your own projects. If you have Designer Edition or higher, you have a few more options like turning on rulers and guides and crosshairs. For now, we're just talking about the basic grid functions available in the Standard Edition. Grab your rectangle tool over here with the drawing tools with the flyout. I'm going to choose Draw a Rectangle. Start at any point here on the grid and just click and drag. I'll drag out and down and watch the dimensions change as I draw. These corners will snap to the grid points. I want it to be exactly 4.25 inches wide, and I want it to be 5.5 inches high. I can see the dimensions change as I draw along the side and the bottom. Release the mouse when it's the right size, and now I've got the rectangle at exactly the dimensions I want. I'll zoom in a little bit, and this time I want to draw another rectangle exactly 1/4 inch inside the first one. I'll start at the 1/4 inch grid point inside there and drag down diagonally to snap perfectly to those grid points. That makes it 3.75 inches wide and 5.0 inches tall. We're going to add a third layer, but I just want it slightly larger than the inner rectangle I just drew. For this, we can use the Offset function. Open the Offset panel along the right-hand side that looks like a star with an outline. Select the inner rectangle and then click Offset. We want it to have sharp corners to make another rectangle. I don't want it to have these curved corners, so choose the Sharp Corner option. Then decrease the distance input to about 0.085. See how that changes as I move my slider? Or I could input that with numbers. And click Apply. Now I want to color these rectangles here so they can represent the colors of paper I'm going to use. The inside rectangle I want gray. For the next one out, I'm going to pick a blue, and then the very outside rectangle I'm also going to do gray. I'll use my eyedropper tool here with the fill colors and choose that same first color of gray. Now I'm going to zoom out, move these aside, and I'm going to create a folded base for my card. Again, with Snap to Grid still active, I'll choose my rectangle tool. I'm going to draw it out to 8.5 inches wide and 5.5 inches tall. For our fold line, let's draw a line with the line drawing tool. Draw it in the middle there. Drag it straight down. I don't have to hold my Shift key when I've got Snap to Grid enabled because it'll just draw those straight lines for me. Change it to a perforated line by going to the Quick Access toolbar with a line style choice. I'll just change it to a dashed line. Now let's make sure the line is centered exactly within the card base. I'll select both those together, and in the Quick Access toolbar, I'm going to Align Center. I'll zoom in and just make sure those lines are where I want them. Group those together, and now I have a card base and several layers to go on the front of my card. At this point, I can turn off Snap to Grid back in the Grid panel. We don't need the snap points active anymore. I'll also make those grid lines a little lighter. You can turn off your grid lines with this checkbox for Show Grid.
But you can also use your quick key letter G on your keyboard to also turn those grid lines on and off. You don't always have to use the Page Setup panel to have your grid show or turn it off. Let's continue designing this card front. We're going to add some text and make it a thank you card. Click your text tool on the left, click it down anywhere on the page to create a cursor, and then type thank you. Let's open the text style panel so we can choose a font. I'm going to use the font Salma. I purchased this from the design store, so it's already in my software and ready to use. It's a pretty script font. If you don't want to buy that font, you can use any font installed on your computer. Resize this text with a corner handle to about 3 inches wide. It doesn't have to be exact, just about 3 inches. At this point, we could cut all these layers and call the card good, but I want to curve the text. Since this is a design class, let's go a little further and make it fun with curved text. We can do that with Text to Path. I'm going to draw an oval that will provide a curve for my text to snap to. Use the Ellipse drawing tool to draw a flat oval. I'll make it about 1 inch tall and about 4.5 inches wide. I'll zoom in to see my text. Double-click the text to enter Text Edit mode. When we have Text Edit mode enabled, we've got a 4-pointed arrow here. We're going to grab this arrow with a click and drag on the mouse. We'll drag it down to the top of the oval. You'll see as you slide it along that it's snapped to and follows that oval path. Notice the oval has also turned gray. That indicates it's changed to a path, so while the text will cut, the path will not cut. Drag it over to the front of our card, and I'm going to change it to a white fill color so we can see it a little better. We could stop here with some nice curved text for our card, but I want to show you something else you can do with your design tools in Silhouette Studio. So we're going to create some butterflies for a nice finishing touch. You can find hundreds of butterflies in the Silhouette Design Store, and you may already have some in your library. But I said we'd be making this card from scratch, so we can create our own butterflies with the design tools available in Silhouette Studio. Go ahead and open a new document by clicking the little plus icon. I've already created some butterflies, and I'm going to use these as my examples as I create some new ones. I've got these in stages so we can see how they're supposed to look. Start with the Ellipse drawing tool to draw an oval about 1 inch high and 1.7 inches wide. Use the green rotation handle at the top of the oval to rotate it a little bit clockwise, about 30 degrees. Now I'll use the Replicate panel. It's over here with some overlapping ovals as the icon. With my oval selected, I'll choose Mirror Below. Let's drag in the left side handle to make the lower piece about 1.4 inches wide. Drag the lower oval upwards so it's overlapping the first oval just a bit. Select both and align their right edges up in the Quick Access toolbar. Select both and mirror right, again with the Replicate panel. Group the 4 ovals in the Quick Access toolbar. Now I want to draw a skinny vertical oval for the center of this butterfly. That's with the Ellipse tool again. Just draw a skinny oval, and since these other ovals are already grouped, I can use my Align Center choice, and that will get the middle oval perfectly centered with the rest of them. Okay, I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to do some point editing. Double-click the skinny oval, which brings up these little edit points. That means we're in point edit mode. And now I can choose any of these points to change the curve of this oval. Click the top edit point and you'll see it turns white. And you'll see these Bezier handles that I can drag out to change the curve for this center oval. And while that point is selected, I can also use the arrow key on my keyboard to nudge that one point down. That looks pretty good, so I'm going to select all the oval pieces and choose Weld on the Quick Access toolbar. This butterfly has some pieces that weren't completely overlapping when we welded, so if I want to get rid of those extra points after welding, all I have to do is right-click and choose Release Compound Path, and then those little pieces can just be selected and deleted. If you like that butterfly, you can stop there and cut it the way it is. But I want to show you how you can further adjust the shape of the butterfly if you want to. With point editing, I can change the curve of these butterfly wings. Double-click the shape to enter point edit mode, and then drag individual points, or add more points if you want, and change the curve to however we want it. Just do what looks good, and remember you can change points and curves to corner or smooth as necessary, and manipulate the curves through the Bezier handles. This is just nice to play with and manipulate it to what works best for you. You should note that you can only do point editing on shapes that are not grouped. Point editing works for shapes in your library too. It doesn't have to be your own creation. I'm going to take this finished butterfly that I like the shape of, and I'm going to make a copy and bring it into the page where we first created the card. I'm going to do Control-C, or you can do Command-C on a Mac to make a copy. Then go back to the Thank You card document and do Control or Command-V to paste that butterfly onto this page. Or right-click and choose Paste. I'm going to take this butterfly and I want it to be about 1.3 inches high. I can fit 3 butterflies on the card if I make them that size. Once I have it the right size, I can make 2 more copies of the small butterfly. I'll hold my Control or Command key and use my arrow key to make more copies. So all these pieces are finished and we're about ready to cut. Just like before, we'll move the pieces we want to cut onto the virtual mat and move the pieces we'll cut later off to the side. I'm going to cut my butterflies first, so I'll just bring them up to the top of my mat. I've got a scrap of paper that I know is going to fit these butterflies on it. Go to the Send panel, and I'm using pattern paper, and I want my action to be cut, and I'm going to use my auto blade. I'm going to go ahead and get this butterfly paper loaded on my mat and cut those. When those are finished cutting, I'll move them off my mat and get ready to cut the next object. Actually, let me show you that right now. I'll move those off of my mat as if I'm done cutting them. Everything else is paper, but I'm going to cut this thank you out of vinyl. I'll zoom in and you can see that even though we've got this text on a path and it's curved, we haven't done anything to get rid of those overlapping edges. So we can either weld the letters up in the Quick Access toolbar, but that will no longer let us edit the text. Another way you can just cut around the letters themselves is in the Send panel. When we have that text selected, we can choose Cut Edge. That's going to ignore any overlapping pieces and just cut around the edge. When we're ready to cut the letters out of vinyl, I can change the material to vinyl, and that will cut with the appropriate settings. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut these pieces one at a time with the different settings for each material.
So I've cut out all of these different pieces with my Cameo machine, and now we're ready to assemble the card. So here's my card base that I created with the perforations. We'll do that first. And I'm going to glue this larger rectangle directly on it. Just using my regular roller adhesive to cover a lot of area. Just line that up and smooth it down. I love using my Cameo for card bases because I can get everything exactly perfect. Okay, this next layer, I'm going to put the gray on top of the blue. Just eyeball it to line it up. And now I want to put my thank you on that card front. And I've cut it with vinyl, so it's just like a nice sticker. It sticks to paper really well. So I'll just need to weed that. Just go slow enough to make sure you don't have any pieces come up with the rest of the vinyl. And then get these letter centers out of the way with my hook tool. Okay, so once I have those all weeded, I'm going to use transfer tape to pick this all up at one time. I'll just lay my transfer tape on there. Use a scraper tool to get it on there nicely. And then I usually flip it over and pull the backing away from the transfer tape. And that leaves the vinyl there in place. And I just want that to be about 1/3 of the way down. Okay, use my scraper tool again. If I apply pressure with the scraper tool against the transfer tape, that just leaves it in place really nicely. And now these butterflies, I'm going to just arrange them so they look nice. And we can give these butterflies some dimension. So we'll just kind of fold them and curl them a little bit. I find my hook tool does a good job just using the handle to kind of curl those butterfly wings. And you can still mail the card with that kind of dimension on it. It's really nice. So as soon as I get these wings shaped, I'm just going to use a glue dot to put them on the paper. So that's just a single little dot that's already a perfect circle, and it sticks instantly. Just put those at a little bit of an angle. And once they're on there, you can continue to curl and shape them just a little bit if you need to. And so that part of the card is ready. And I want it to stand out a little bit from the card base. So I'm going to use foam adhesive. And we'll line it up on the card. And so that Makes a really nice dimensional card. And you can see how Silhouette Studio has a lot of tools you can use when designing from scratch without library designs. Now we've talked about working with library designs, modifying library designs, and creating designs from scratch with drawing tools and text tools. In this next section, you'll learn about some specialty design tools in Silhouette Studio, like the Pop-Up Creator and Warp tools. Some of these specialty tools require Designer Edition or higher, but even basic users can use the Pop-Up Creator. Let me show you how it works as we create a pop-up cactus card. Once you know how it works, you can choose your own designs to use in pop-up cards.
In the software, I've got a new document, and I've opened the design called Can't Touch This that I've purchased from the design store. I want to resize this to exactly 5.1 inches tall, and I'll use my Scale tool up in the Quick Access toolbar. Click the lock symbol so that everything resizes proportionately. And I'm going to change the height to 5.1 inches and hit Enter. Now I'll drag it off to the side and ungroup it so I can access the individual parts. Drag a copy of the cactus over to the virtual mat. I'll hold my Alt key or Option key on a Mac and just click and drag a copy over. I always like to work with a copy of the design when using the Pop-Up Creator so I can still access the original shape later. Now I want to draw a card base with my rectangle drawing tool. I'm going to make it 5.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches high. I'll start with my rectangle tool and then adjust it with my scale options. Unlock it, and then I'll make it 5.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches high. I want to draw a perforated line, so I'm just going to use my line tool and just drag it horizontally across while holding my Shift key. And that needs to be 5.5 inches wide, so in the Scale tool, I'll lock it and plug in my dimensions. I'd better unlock it, 5.5 inches wide and 0 inches high. Now I'll center these together with the Center option in the Quick Access toolbar and change my line to a perforation with the line style. And group it. That gives me my outer card base. Now I want to create an inner piece where the pop-up itself will be attached. I'm going to use my rounded rectangle tool, and I want this one to be 5.0 inches wide and 8.0 inches high. Select it and change those dimensions again with the Scale tool. I'll go ahead and center that with the base again with the Quick Access toolbar. That gives us an even border all the way around, the inner piece and the outer piece where it's going to be attached. Bring the cactus in, zoom in just a little bit, and I want to center this cactus vertically. I can use my Vertical Align tool, my center choice, but visually that's not exactly in the center. That's just because the shape itself is asymmetrically balanced. So just to give me the visual balance I need, I'm going to nudge that over with my arrow key. Now we're ready to open the pop-up panel and turn this cactus into a pop-up. Select the cactus, open the pop-up panel over here on the right, and with that cactus selected, I'm going to click Convert Selected Shapes to Pop-Up. The software automatically converts the cactus into a pop-up with the slices and perforations where they need to be. What we need to do with this is position it so the pop-up fold line matches up with the existing fold line that we already perfectly centered on the base. Select the cactus and just use the arrow key to nudge the cactus up. Zoom in, and we want the pop-up fold line with red dots to match the fold line we already created. Now I've got those two lines matched up. Zoom out just a little bit. I want these red dots to extend to the edge of my inner rectangle, so the fold line goes all the way across for the cactus to attach to. Drag both of these red dots out to the edge of the shape I want my pop-up attached to, which is the inner rectangle we made earlier. So that's the most important part of creating a pop-up card. But we can also fine-tune these inner fold tabs, which are called struts. This will vary from design to design. For this cactus, I'm going to change it to a base width of 20%. The base width changes the very bottom connection. The minimum strut width avoids letting some of those connections be too skinny. I'm going to change mine to 0.085. The dash pitch is controlling the width of the perforations on the struts, and I'm going to set that at 0.030. You could also adjust how far the pop-out protrudes from the rest of the card by dragging this little arrow here. You can have it really close to the card or stand out really far. But I'm going to click Undo so I can leave it at the default. I need to group the cactus and the inner rectangle, so I'm going to select both of those, then choose Group. Now I can move the larger base off to the side since we don't need it until we're ready to cut. We can do whatever we want to this design now to dress it up. I'll change my card base color to pink so I know what color I want to cut it from. And I'm going to turn the pop-up card to a turquoise or aqua. That fill color covered up my lines, so I'm going to ungroup that briefly. And I'm going to select that background piece and send it to the back, and then I'll group it again. And then my cactus is going to be green. We could stop here and cut, but I want to add a few more elements. I've got a design in my library called Aztec Card that has some pieces I really like. It kind of gives my card a Southwest theme. So I'm going to borrow one of these sections of this card and put them in my own card for the corners. I'll zoom into this. Now if I try and ungroup, it won't let me ungroup those pieces. So if you remember, if you can't ungroup, that means it's a compound path. So I'm just going to right-click and choose Release Compound Path. Now I can access those inner pieces of the card. To select just the parts I want, I'll click and drag, but I can't get all of the pieces. So what I need to do to add to that selection is to hold my Shift key while I click on those other little bits that didn't get selected the first time. Once I have those pieces selected, I'm going to group them, and then I can pull them away. And I don't need the rest of this card. I'll need 4 of these shapes, one for each corner. So I'm going to go to my Replicate panel and create a column of 4. That gives me 4 of them really quickly. I'll place them in the four corners and use my Align tools to get them where I want them. If I select it, I can use my arrow keys to nudge them where I need to. Hold the Shift key to select more than one piece at once by clicking on them. I'll just keep moving these around a little bit at a time and align them with each other to make sure that I've got them where I want them in relationship to each other. I'm almost done. Okay, that looks good for those designs. And I want to add a little more something here, so I'm going to open another design from my library, this Seeing Triangles border. Again, I just want a few of these pieces, so I'll ungroup it as far as it will go. This is another compound path. So to use those pieces, I need to right-click and choose Release Compound Path. Then I can drag away the outside border, and I'm going to zoom in. I just want 3 large triangles with the 2 sets of tiny dots in between. I'll select those and choose Group. Now I can take them over to my card. I'm going to put a set on this side of my cactus. Remember that you can always undo if you do something that you don't like. That undo button at the top is really handy. I'm going to select that, and then my Control or Command arrow will make another copy. And then I'll hold my Shift key with my arrow to make a little wider jumps. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And I'm going to group all of this together right now so I can move it around without losing any pieces. These little cutouts in this blue card piece will let the pink base show through, which is a fun effect. Finally, I want to take my text over here that's part of the original cactus design, and I'll group that together. I'll resize it to about 3.1 inches wide and 3.3 inches high. Once I've got that, I'll bring it to the front so I can see it, and I'll be able to cut that with vinyl and fit it on the lower section of the card. This leaves enough room to write a short little note by hand on the card. I'll look at the whole thing, and that looks good to me. So we're ready to cut. I can cut my base with pink, then I'll move that once it's cut. And I'll move my blue piece onto my mat and cut that from blue paper. And then I can cut this text from white vinyl, just like we did in the last project. Then finally, I'm going to cut 2 of these cactuses, and I'll show you how to assemble that after I get it all cut out with my Cameo.
So I have all of these pieces already cut out, and I've weeded my vinyl. I've done that all with my Cameo. And now let me show you how to actually work with the pop-up card once it's been cut out. So there's this main fold line across the center. You want to make it a valley fold, but you don't want to bend that pop-up piece in the middle. So you're just kind of gently folding everything a little at a time to make sure that the right pieces fold the right direction. So there's these little perforations, so I just kind of gently tug out and up as I'm getting these top perforations on each of these segments. And just be really gentle. Just kind of move it a little at a time to make sure that these bend where they're supposed to. Okay, so now I've got them starting to bend the right way. I'll just kind of tug that up there. Just make sure that they are going in the right direction, and eventually you can get to the point where you are folding. Okay, so now I can press it flat and get a nice crease on all of those. Now if you do have little skinny bits on the back, you can just cut those off with scissors or just tug them out of the way. Any of that really skinny stuff, it's really, you're not going to notice it when you glue it down to your card. Okay, so now we've got that ready, and I've got the base, so I'm going to fold that on the perforation we created. And that I'm just going to kind of tuck in there, make those two perforations match up, and center that. Then I will fold down the inside bit and add the glue. So I'll use my liquid glue for those little skinny spots, and then I'll move to the wider roll-on glue in a little bit once I get these skinny spots all taken care of. So I'm just holding both these layers in place while I work with the adhesive. Once I have all the glue I need, I can just fold this top one back over and press it down. So that's going to keep it perfectly in place. And now the top section is glued down, and I can do the same thing to add adhesive to the bottom section. And then when that's ready, again, just fold your top layer down and press it down. And that gets both of your pieces attached. So you've got your pop-up card. And then we'll just add these other little elements. Stick on the cactus. So I do like to do this with my pop-up cards. I'll turn the original shape into the pop-up design, but I'll save the original one off to the side so I can cut it separately. And that adds a really nice accent piece to make that pop-up stand out. And we can add this second cactus to the top. So it's got a cute design on the outside as well. And then finally, I will add my little vinyl saying as the last element on the card. And leave the vinyl in place against the transfer tape. Just line it up. And press it on. When we peel the transfer tape away, that vinyl will just stay there against the paper. So there we've taken a cactus design and the little phrase that came with it and turned it into a really fun cactus pop-up card with a lot of design elements. Another specialty tool is the Warp tool. This is available in Silhouette Studio Designer Edition and higher. We used point edit tools when we created the butterfly from scratch in an earlier project. That's one way to stretch and manipulate the curves of a design, but the Warp tool is another way to do that. I like to use it to add a little whimsy to a simple symmetrical design. So we're going to do that in the Silhouette software. So I already have this cake design opened and recolored, and it's really cute the way it is, but the Warp tool lets us add more personality. So I'm going to select it and hold Alt or Option to drag a copy off to the side, and we're just going to save that so we can compare the two designs later. So I'm going to zoom in to my cake, and I'm going to open the Warp panel. Now if you don't see it, and remember this is for Designer Edition and higher, if you don't see it, if you have large buttons or a small screen, you're just looking for this little pop-out arrow, but this is your Warp panel icon. So let's go ahead and choose the candle first. So we'll select the candle and just click Warp Selected Shapes. Now that it just adds grid points where you're able to manipulate the design. So I'm going to zoom in some more. And I'm going to squeeze in the side, so I'm just dragging these little red dots. You can see how that shape just kind of curves. And I'm going to pull up one corner and just kind of make that all a little more smooth. Okay, so that looks good for the candle. Let's move on to the cake. So select the cake and again choose Warp Selected Shapes. And this time I'm going to drag out the top corners and kind of bow out the sides a little bit. And you just keep doing that till it looks good. And let's see, I'll just add a little bit to the curve to the top also. Okay, and moving on to the base, select it, choose Warp Selected Shapes. And I want to point out here that you can actually add more warp points by increasing your divisions, columns, and rows. So I'm going to put 3 divisions, 2 columns, and 1 row. So I've just added more points where I can manipulate it. So I'm going to, let's see, drag this off to the side, this off to this side, drag the corners up just a little bit. And I think I want to bring that to the front so it's overlapping that cake and showing that curve. Okay, so you can see that shape has now changed a little bit from its original. And let me tell you what these other things on this warp panel do. So you can actually, if you click Restore Original Shapes, you can take that back to where it was at the beginning before you applied any warp. And if you click Release Warp, that is going to commit the warp and remove the grid. So if you click on a shape that you've warped once, you'll see all of those warp handles. If you click on it one more time, that will hide the warp handles, and you can do things like move the whole design. And this one, let's see, we're just going to rotate it just a little bit and nudge it over to add a little bit more stretch to it. And then when we like the design, we can commit the warp. So I'm going to drag this original cake over so you can see them side by side, how one has a little bit of, well, it's just symmetric, it's cute, but this other one has a lot more personality. So I'm going to go ahead, I would do this as a print and cut, and I've already done that for you, so we're just going to assemble it now. So as I mentioned, I've already released the warp, then did a print and cut of the cake. So I just cut it out using my printer and then my Cameo. And this card is just layers like we've done previously. There's different shapes of rectangles, and I added some extra little cutout designs and added some adhesive, the foam adhesive, to make that kind of pop. And so I've just added some more foam adhesive on the back of this print and cut cake. And I will just center that on there. And that just makes a really cute, whimsical birthday card. The final specialty tool we're going to cover is the conical warp tool. This one is only available in Silhouette Studio Designer Edition Plus or in Business Edition. The software upgrades are a great investment if you enjoyed the design aspect of Silhouette Studio. We're going to warp a design so it doesn't become skewed as we apply it to a conical or tapered surface. So when you apply something straight, like this tape, to a tapered surface, if you try and apply it straight across, it will actually curve as you apply it, and it curves to fit the surface. So what the conical warp tool does is it warps the design perfectly to compensate for that curve. All you need to do is create your design and plug in the container's measurements. We'll work a little bit more with the text and modify tools for this project. So in the software, you can use any fonts and designs you like, but in this example, I'm going to be using a premium font duo from the Silhouette Design Store called Amasteri. Font duos are great to use together when pairing two different fonts, and this one has some extra glyphs. So we'll start with the text tool on the left, click down to create a cursor on the page, and then we're going to type stay. Now we'll click the text tool again to start another word, and we're just going to type cool. Now we'll open the text style panel. We'll select the word stay. Let me zoom in just a little bit. Select the word stay, and we want the font called Amasteri Script. This is another one I bought from the design store. And so I can start typing it in the text field, and then I'll click on Amasteri Script down below. And then we're going to select the word cool, and we want Amasteri Hand. So we'll choose that one from the list. Now some font variations that come as a set, they'll be listed separately, like these ones are here. Some fonts, if you can't find the different varieties, you just click on this drop-down arrow, and sometimes your extra fonts with that set will be listed here. Now, this Amasteri font does have a set of glyphs or special characters called Amasteri Extras. Now, if you have Designer Edition or higher, you can easily see the glyphs right in Silhouette Studio. We'll click that middle tab for the glyphs, and I'll go ahead and change my slider so those glyphs are a little easier to see. And then I'm going to start a cursor with my text tool, and I want to change the glyphs to Amasteri Extras. And I want this first little kind of a splash mark. So with my cursor on the page, I'll just click that once to get that little symbol. Then I want to get another cursor, and I'm going to choose the line of dots right here. Now, if you're working with the basic edition of Silhouette Studio, you can still find glyphs, but you would do that through the character map in Windows or in FontBook on a Mac. And then once you have those characters in that other software, you can just copy them and paste them into your Silhouette Studio workspace. Just so you know, the characters here are the exclamation point and the period. So now I have all my elements here for the cup I'm going to create, And so I'm just going to color and resize them. So this stay, I want to be 2.3 inches wide. And I want it to be colored dark pink. So while it's still selected, I'm just going to choose the pink from my fill color in the quick access toolbar. And then the cool, I want it to be about 3 inches wide. And I want it to be black. Okay, so I want to drag these together. I want the stay to be over cool, and I want it to overlap slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and center those together. And I do want the stay to be in front, so I'm going to click Bring to Front in the Quick Access toolbar. Now the layers you can see above the black, and I'm just going to nudge that down a little bit. Okay, and so then I want to color these other glyphs that same dark pink. And I want to resize this splash mark to about 1.8 inches tall. And I want the dotted line to be about 1.7 inches wide. All right, so the splash mark, I'm going to replicate it by mirroring a copy. So I'm going to open my replicate panel and choose mirror right. And then I'll just drag it over here to the other side of my design. Then I want to group those together after I have aligned them. So I'm going to hold my Shift key to select them both at the same time and align top and click Group. And now I can center all of these at the same time. Okay, so now for my dotted line, I want to make some copies. So I'm going to select that and use my Control or Command and the arrow key to make one to the left. And my, Control or Command, select the middle one again, and Control or Command arrow key to the right. So I've got 3 of those lined up in a row. I'm going to group those together. And then I want to make a copy to place over the text. So I'm going to use my Control or Command and arrow key and just drag that up there. Reposition everything so it looks good, and then I'm going to center everything. And that looks pretty good. So now I want to use another great design tool to make a cutout for this upper word to cut into and just sit in the middle of the black word. And so I'm going to go to my offset panel. I'm going to select the word stay, and I want to choose offset and put a distance of 0.030 and click apply. So I've got this skinny little outline around the stay, and I'm going to use that part to cut into this word below it. So now I'm going to go into my modify panel and make sure that I have selected just the offset of the word. And I want to make sure that it's in front of my other text so it will cut out that text below it. So I want to bring it to the front. And then I'm going to hold my Shift key to also select the word cool at the same time. And now I can use subtract in the modify panel. So that's going to cut away using the front shape to cut into the back shape. Okay, so that has cut away just the way I want it to. The portions of the lower layer that were covered by the upper layer have disappeared. So while those are all selected, I'm going to go ahead and group them together. Now I'm going to weld stay so those pieces that are overlapping don't cut into each other. So I'll select it and choose weld. And now I've got everything aligned. Let me just make sure I've got those two. I'm going to group together the two words. And then one more time, make sure everything is aligned. Okay, so that actually is a really nice design as it is right now. And you could use that maybe to put on a t-shirt or something. It looks great. But we want to step it up one more time. And we're going to show one more design tool that's available, as I mentioned, in Designer Edition Plus or Business Edition. And that is the Conical Warp tool. So I'm going to go to the Warp panel again. And I want to warp this design so it can be applied to a conical surface. So I'm going to group all of that. And now I can choose the second tab for Conical Warp. I'll move that panel up so I can see everything. And with that design selected, if I choose Conical Warp Selected Shapes, that is going to warp my design. And you'll actually see, if you zoom out, you can see this outer edge kind of showing your border so you can see what's going on. So we are going to plug in the dimensions of our container. So I know that my container at the top is 3.75 inches. And at the base, it's 2.5 inches across, and it is 6 inches tall. So I plug those in, and you can see that that design curves just a little bit as you change those dimensions. Now, if you want to resize your design after you've applied a warp, you don't want to resize with the corner handles. You would do that with this middle section here. That's how you resize a design that's already been warped. And then we can adjust the vertical position with this very bottom slider. So we're going to just slide that along till it looks vertically centered. All right, when we're ready to commit, we just click Apply. And we're going to select all of it and group it. And now we're ready to cut the design. And with a layered design like this, I actually like to cut by fill color. And so let's go make sure that our page setup panel is set for the vinyl that I've got ready to cut. So in the page setup panel, my vinyl is 6 inches wide and 4 inches high. And then we can actually center this to the page size that we've created by choosing Center to Page with our Align tools in the Quick Access toolbar. And now we're ready to go to the Send panel. We're going to go to the tab that uses a fill action, and that lets me tell the machine when and where to cut based on the fill colors we've used on the page. Now, you don't have to cut vinyl this way, but it does lend itself well to a design like this. So if I want to cut the pink first, I'm going to drag this pink box up to the top. And I want to set my material to be vinyl. We're using glossy vinyl, and I want to make sure that my action says cut and my tool is set to the auto blade for my Cameo 3. Now I don't want the black to cut, so I'm going to uncheck the box for the black, and you can see that the bold lines have disappeared for the black. The bold is only on the pink, and so that is the only thing that's going to cut when I send it this time. You also want to make sure that any other colors are unchecked. So we just want to cut the pink, so the pink is the only one with a checkbox. So what I'll do is I will load a piece of 6 inches by 4 inches vinyl in pink onto my mat and load it into my Cameo. And then I'll click send here in the send panel. When that's all done cutting, I can unload the mat, I can take the vinyl off, and then I would uncheck the pink box and check the black box. So you can see that only the black lines, the black shapes are going to cut. And so then I would load the black vinyl onto my Cameo mat, put the mat in the machine and click send. And that way I don't have to move anything on and off the mat. I can just choose which color to cut at a time. So I have these pieces cut with my Cameo, and I'm just going to weed both these colors and then use transfer tape to apply it to my curved surface. So after I've weeded both those colors, I'm just going to use transfer tape to pick up one layer, and I don't need to use any kind of registration marks to line those up because those shapes are going to fit well together. And so I'll just pick up the pink first. And then I will just line it up where it belongs on the black because of the cutout we made with that offset. So it's really easy to see where it goes. So now I have my 2 layers on one piece of transfer tape, and we can apply it to the tumbler. And because when we were choosing the warp tools, we had that vertically centered on the tumbler shape, we can just vertically center it on this mug, on the tumbler. Press it down in the middle first, and then smooth outwards. And instead of like that masking tape curving up, it's going to go straight across, and it leaves that nice shape. Let me pull off the transfer tape. And we don't have any curved lines, it just looks nice and straight. We've covered a lot of design tools in Silhouette Studio as we've worked with library designs in their original state, as we've modified existing designs, as we've created a project from scratch with drawing and text tools, and as we've explored some specialty design tools. As you practice these techniques, you'll gain confidence in your design skills. If you need to know more about any of the Silhouette Studio tools I've covered in this class, be sure to check out our other how-to videos on the Silhouette YouTube channel. You'll also find tutorials on the Silhouette 101 blog. Finally, you can contact the support team at silhouetteamerica.com. Thanks for joining me. Now go practice your design skills and make something amazing.